I'm Caleb Monroe, 33, freelance audio engineer and eldest son. The banquet hall shimmered with gold streamers and clinking glasses, laughter rippling through the crowd like waves on a lake I wasn't allowed to touch. I stood just outside the side entrance, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as my father raised a glass. My father. His silver hair gleamed under the soft chandelier light. He looked like a man at peace. Inside, the whole Monroe family was lined up like a portrait, my sister Rachel in a fitted navy dress, holding one of her twins on her hip, Uncle Jeremy in suspenders, already red-faced from too much Pinot. Even Paul, our cousin who hadn't shown up to a family event since 2015, was there, balancing a paper plate stacked with prime rib, everyone but me. I adjusted my shirt collar, damp with sweat from the August air, and approached the front desk. A young woman in a black dress shirt glanced up from the guest list, her headset wire coiled like a question mark. "Hi," I said, forcing a polite tone. "I'm here for the Monroe retirement party. Caleb Monroe." She blinked. "And you're with?" I swallowed. "I'm his son." Her eyes scanned the list again. She clicked her pen once, twice. "I'm sorry. I don't see you on the list. It might have been a miscommunication. Do you maybe want to text someone inside?" "No," I said, too quickly. Are you sure? Can you double-check?" She smiled, tight-lipped. "I've checked twice." Behind her, I saw Rachel pass by with a wine glass, laughing with one of Dad's old coworkers. She didn't look toward the window. I tried again. Maybe my sister arranged it. Rachel Monroe. The woman shook her head. She confirmed the head count last night. "It's strict RSVP. Sorry." I nodded slowly, stepping back from the podium, my reflection warping in the glass door. My hands curled and uncurled. I could hear the beginning of a toast echo faintly from inside Rachel's voice, clear and calm, calling our father the kindest man we know. "If you've ever had your name left off the list, literally or otherwise, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. You're not alone. I promise." I turned to walk away, trying not to look too broken in front of the valet crew. But then, a car pulled up, a long black vehicle with tinted windows and vintage wheels. A man stepped out in a sharp gray suit, carrying something heavy under a velvet cloth. He moved with care, like the item was alive. He headed straight toward the entrance. The hostess turned to greet him, but before she could speak, he gestured at me. "I'm here for Mr. Caleb Monroe," he said clearly. Delivery confirmed. Full restoration complete. The Steinway he asked about 2 years ago. It's ready. Heads turned. Someone near the door, one of Dad's friends, I think, opened it wider and stared between the delivery man and me. "You're that Caleb." And just like that, the crowd inside began to stir. Faces twisted, eyebrows lifted, voices hushed. Even Rachel paused mid-sentence, her wine glass frozen in midair. I stepped forward, and the room went silent. Just like that. The silence wasn't just quiet, it was heavy, like velvet pressed against my chest. I could hear the small, indecisive movements of people trying to decide whether to clap, gasp, or pretend they hadn't seen me. I didn't walk in right away. I just stood there, letting the moment breathe. The man with the Steinway glanced toward me for a cue, unsure whether to proceed. Then, slowly, I stepped through the doorway. The same woman at the front desk who had turned me away now shifted behind her clipboard, her eyes darting between the list and my face as if a name would magically appear if she looked hard enough. I gave her a nod. "It's all right." My footsteps echoed faintly as I walked in. The carpet was thick, expensive, the kind that silenced most movement but not mine. The room had gone still, Only the soft ambient jazz playing from the speakers filled the background. Dad turned toward me, his eyes squinting slightly in confusion. I wasn't close enough to see the exact shift in his expression, but his shoulders rose a fraction, as if bracing for something. Rachel was the first to speak. "Caleb, what are you doing here?" It wasn't surprise. It was control. Her voice wrapped around the words like a warning. "I'm here for Dad," I said simply. I gestured toward the delivery man, who began to uncover the object. A gasp rippled through the crowd as the polished black casing of the piano was revealed, reflecting the soft amber glow of the chandeliers above. Dad took a step forward. "Is that?" I nodded. "The 1953 Steinway B. The one you used to take me to see at Shelton's Music House. You told me you'd play Chopin on it if you ever had the time. Well, now you have time." The emotion caught him somewhere between a smile and a sob. "I thought it was sold years ago," he said. I tracked it down. "Had it restored?" I said. "The keys are original ivory. I even had the cracked pedal replaced with one from a matching series." There was a long pause, and then Dad did something I hadn't seen him do since I was 13. He walked over and hugged me, the kind of hug that starts from the spine and wraps around every apology left unsaid. The kind of hug that doesn't ask questions, just answers them. Behind us, someone clapped, then another. Soon the room erupted, not loudly, but genuinely, the kind of applause that isn't just about the gesture, but about the silence that came before it. But I wasn't there for that. I pulled away, gently, and nodded toward the man with the piano. "Can you help set it near the stage?" He nodded and wheeled it away with slow reverence. Dad was still holding onto my shoulders. "Why didn't you come in sooner?" I gave him a small smile. "Because I wasn't invited." His face dropped, and then it hit him. "Rachel, I didn't think he'd show up." She cut in sharply. "He hasn't been to a family thing in years." Dad's gaze turned toward her. Disappointment etched into the lines of his face. "He's still my son." Rachel's arms crossed. "You don't know the full story, Dad." He looked back at me. "Maybe I don't, but I know this matters." I wanted to say so much. About the missed birthdays, about the wedding invite that never came, about the way Rachel and Mom had split the family in two after the divorce like we were picking teams. But this wasn't the time. Instead, I looked around at the faces watching me. Some shocked, some embarrassed, some just quietly observing. "Anyway," I said, clearing my throat, "I figured retirement deserves something more permanent than a toaster oven or golf clubs." Dad laughed, watery-eyed. "You were always the quiet one. But when you show up, you show up." We sat together near the piano once it was in place. Someone handed Dad a small padded bench, and he looked at me with hesitation. "I haven't played in years. You haven't had a reason to." He chuckled nervously and let his fingers hover over the keys. They trembled at first, then settled, then sound. The first few notes of Nocturne in E-flat major drifted into the air, brittle but beautiful, like memory turned into music. People quieted again. A few held up phones, others just leaned in, listening to the way each note seemed to speak. And I just sat there beside him, quietly nodding along. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't on the outside looking in. I was inside, and he was playing for me. Later, as the room melted into casual chatter and dessert plates clinked, I wandered toward the bar. I needed water, something to help me slow down. The bartender gave me a kind look. "That was something else." "Man, thanks," I said, sipping slowly. "You really his son?" "Last time I checked." He smiled. "Well, you made this night." I turned to glance back at the room. Dad was surrounded by his friends, grinning like a kid, recounting the surprise. Rachel was off to the side, her arms still crossed, expression unreadable. And I just stood there. "If it's okay," I said quietly. "I think I'm gonna leave soon." The bartender nodded. "You sure I didn't come for them?" I replied. "Just for him." Before I could take a step, though, someone tapped my shoulder. I turned. It was Aunt Mel. "You always were your father's son?" she said, gently touching my elbow. "Don't let them freeze you out again. Not after tonight." I smiled. Half a nod. I didn't know what would happen after tonight. If I'd be invited to the next family thing. If Rachel would ever speak to me without resentment. If Mom would ever call again. But for now, Dad was smiling at a piano he'd dreamed about for decades. His fingers still warm from the keys. And I was the reason it happened. That was enough for today. The next morning, I woke up with aching shoulders and a dull ringing in my ears from the applause. I hadn't heard that kind of sound in years, not for me, not in a room filled with people who had learned how to forget me. I was staying at a modest Airbnb a few blocks from the venue. Clean, no frills, just a small kitchenette and a balcony that overlooked a garden I knew wasn't mine. I stood there with a mug of black coffee and watched an older couple walk their golden retriever, hand in hand. The world hadn't shifted much, but I had. Something inside me felt cracked open. Not broken, just exposed. My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Rachel. "You shouldn't have done that last night. You made it about you." I stared at the message for a long time, letting her words sit in the space between us like cold air. Then I typed. I didn't speak. I just gave him something he always wanted. No response, just the tiny read receipt blinking back at me like a challenge. I didn't expect her to understand. We hadn't understood each other in years. When Mom and Dad divorced, Rachel aligned herself with Mom so fast it left whiplash in her wake. I was already out of the house by then, scraping by doing sound tech for local theaters and side jobs for independent musicians. Rachel called it running off, as if I had fled some duty she'd taken on by default. But I didn't run. I waited. For them to call. For the family group chat to include me again. For someone to say, "Hey, Caleb, we miss you." Instead, silence. And now, after one gift, I'd become a threat again. Around noon, I got a call from Dad. "Hey," he said, his voice hoarse in that morning after way. "You still in town?" "Yeah," I said. "Just for today. Flying out tomorrow." "Lunch." "Just us." I hesitated, not because I didn't want to, but because I wasn't used to being asked. "Sure," I said, where he named a place I didn't recognize. New, trendy, probably picked by someone else. But I agreed. We met at a cafe with concrete floors and plants hanging from exposed pipes. He waved from a corner booth, wearing a soft blue sweater I'd never seen him in before. He looked lighter. I slid into the booth. "Nice place. Rachel's idea." He admitted. "She took me here once. Figured I'd give it a second shot." We ordered quickly. Small plates, coffee, a ginger soda for him. Once the waiter left, he leaned forward, hands clasped. "I owe you." "You don't." "I do," he said more firmly, not just for the piano, for showing up, for giving me a moment I'll never forget. I looked down at my coffee. "You deserved it." His eyes softened. "You've always been quiet, Caleb. Even when you were little. Remember that Christmas when you were 6 and got the toy drum? Everyone thought you'd bang it nonstop. But you only touched it when the house was still." I smiled. Didn't want to interrupt. "Well, I should have asked why you felt the need to be that small." The air shifted. "I didn't know you weren't invited," he added. I thought it was a surprise. Rachel said you'd been too busy. Said you probably wouldn't come anyway. I was never told. I said, I only found out because someone posted a group photo on Facebook. And your old colleague Dawn commented, "Can't wait for Saturday." His face paled. God. I waved it off. I'm not here to make you feel bad. I feel bad anyway. He looked at me for a long moment, then reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was creased and faded, like it had been handled too many times. I never told anyone, but after the divorce, I kept this, he said, passing it over. It's the sketch you made in high school, of the Steinway. I blinked. It was my drawing, pencil on old lined paper, smudged at the edges, signed in the corner, Caleb, age 16. You left it on the kitchen table, he said. I kept it, framed it for a while, then hid it when things got tense. But I never forgot. Something caught in my throat. I knew you remembered that piano, I said quietly. He smiled. How could I not? You were the only one who ever listened to me when I talked about it. Our food arrived. We ate slowly, conversation drifting between light and heavy. At one point, he asked about my work. I told him I'd helped mix a podcast that hit the top charts. He didn't pretend to know the show, but he was proud anyway. You were always good with sound, he said. Better than me. Not better, I said, just different. When the check came, he insisted on paying. It's the least I can do. We walked outside into the afternoon sun. He paused near the corner. Come by the house tonight, he said. Just you and me. We can play something together, like the old days. I hesitated. Rachel's not staying there, he added. Just me. I think we've earned a quiet evening. I nodded. Yeah, I'd like that. He reached out and hugged me again. This time, it wasn't surprise. It was intention. I watched him walk away, a little slower than yesterday, but with more direction, and I stood there on that sidewalk, holding a piece of lined paper and feeling more seen than I had in years. Later that evening, when I stepped into the familiar house, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No TV, no chatter, just the faint creak of the wooden floor beneath my shoes. In the living room, the Steinway stood like a monument. The way the light from the window hit the surface made it look alive. Dad was already seated at the bench. You ready? He asked. I sat beside him, gently, careful not to shift the keys too hard. He started playing a simple duet, something we used to mess around with when I was 12. I filled in the upper notes, and for a moment, we weren't father and son trying to fix the past. We were just two people, making music in the same room. The first few notes we played together were clumsy, like two voices relearning how to speak to each other after years of silence. But the melody was familiar enough to find its way back. I watched his hands, how they moved. Slower now. More deliberate, and mirrored his tempo with the kind of quiet respect you only learn from distance. The piece we played wasn't complex. It wasn't meant to impress. It was just something we used to hum under our breath during late-night TV, fingers tapping against the armrest. We didn't say much, but music had always been where our silence went to hide. When we finished, he let out a small chuckle. Still got it? I nodded. Mostly. He turned to me. You still playing? I shrugged. Not like this. Mostly just behind a desk now, editing, engineering, layering other people's ideas. I haven't touched keys in months. He was quiet a moment. You should change that. There was no pressure in his tone, just the suggestion of something remembered, something still breathing. I stood and walked over to the bookshelf. The photos were all updated: Rachel and her twins, Mom at her retirement ceremony, family barbecues I was never invited to. but one photo caught my eye. It was buried behind a porcelain lighthouse and a candle shaped like an acorn. It was me, 6 years old, grinning crookedly in front of a toy keyboard. Dad behind me, one hand on my shoulder, the other midair in what looked like a conductor's pose. My cheeks were red. His hair was darker then. We looked like a team. "I thought she threw this out," I said, holding the frame carefully. "She did," he replied. "I dug it out of the trash the same day. Kept it behind the others so no one would see." I set the photo back down. Gently. Why, he looked over. Because I knew the day would come when I'd need to remember I had 2 kids. Not just the one who stayed. That hit harder than I expected. I leaned against the bookshelf, arms folded, staring at the carpet. "I didn't leave because I didn't care," I said. "I left because I didn't know where I fit anymore." He nodded. "I know that now." There was a long silence between us, the kind that didn't feel heavy, just honest. "Do you ever talk to Mom?" I asked quietly. "Not much," he said. "She made it clear after the divorce that she wanted her version of the family. Rachel fit that picture better. You reminded her too much of me." I looked over. "That's not your fault." "No," he agreed, but it was still real. The clock in the hallway chimed 7. Outside, the streetlights flickered to life, and the house settled into its old creaks and quiet rhythms. He stood and walked into the kitchen, returning with 2 mugs of tea chamomile, the kind we used to sip on sick days when neither of us wanted to talk about feelings, just cartoons and warm blankets. We sat in silence, sipping. "Do you remember that music store on Elm?" he asked. "Shelton's, yeah? That place was magic. You'd walk in and go straight to the digital pianos. I'd pretend to be looking at sheet music, but I was just watching you play whatever came to mind." I smiled. They always told me I had good ears. "You had more than that," he said. "You had a way of feeling the room. That stuck with me." He reached into a small box on the coffee table and pulled out a bundle of envelopes, rubber banded together. "These were the letters I started writing you but never sent." I looked at him, startled. "Why didn't you?" "Because I didn't think you wanted to hear from me. Rachel said you were better off, that I'd just stir things up. And I listened." He placed the bundle in my lap. "You don't have to read them, but I wanted you to know they existed." My fingers traced the edges of the paper. They weren't thick or fancy, just regular printer sheets, sometimes even notebook pages, written in pen with crossings out and corrections. Real. I held them to my chest for a second before placing them beside me. "I'll read them," I said. "Just not right now." He nodded. Like that answer was enough. We talked until the tea went cold. Not about the heavy things, but small ones. Old neighbors. Movies we still hadn't seen. A dog he was thinking of adopting now that he had the time. And when I finally stood to leave, the house didn't feel like a stranger's anymore. It felt paused. Like it was waiting for someone to come back. He walked me to the door and opened it slowly. "I'm proud of you," he said. "Not just for the gift, for the man you've become." I swallowed hard. "Thanks, Dad." He looked at me for a long time before speaking again. "Can we start over?" I nodded. "Yeah, we can." I left that night carrying the letters, my old drawing, and something I hadn't expected to find on this trip, a place in his life that was still open. Back at the Airbnb, I sat on the edge of the bed and finally opened the first envelope. It started with my name, written in careful block letters. Caleb. It said, "I'm sorry for the space between us. I know I'm part of the reason it grew so wide. I didn't get through them all. Just 3. They weren't perfect. Some were rambling, Others were angry. One ended mid-sentence, but each one was a snapshot of a man trying to say what he never could out loud. That he missed me. That he remembered me. That he hadn't forgotten who I was, even when everyone else seemed to. The next morning, I flew home. On the plane, I looked out the window and thought about how strange it is how something like a piano can build a bridge where words failed for years. How a moment of music could shift something no apology ever managed to. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know if Rachel and I would ever speak again, if Mom would soften, if the family would rearrange itself to make room for me again. But I knew my dad played Chopin last night, and I was sitting next to him when he did. The weeks that followed were quiet. Not silent, just the kind of quiet where everything feels suspended. Like the world is waiting to see which way things will tilt. I got back into my usual rhythm: long editing hours, mic testing in dim studios, occasional freelance gigs for podcasters who thought warmth was a filter you could just slap onto a voice. But my mind kept drifting back to that night at the piano. The way my father's fingers had trembled for the first 3 notes. The way the keys had answered him anyway. I didn't hear from Rachel. Not a call, not a message, not even one of her infamous passive-aggressive Instagram posts with cryptic captions like, "Some people show up late and expect applause." She had a way of making her point without naming names. I didn't bite. Instead, I kept my distance. It was Dad who reached out the most. A voicemail here. A photo of the dog he'd eventually adopted, an old shepherd mix named Roscoe. Once, he even sent me a grainy video of him trying to play Claire de Lune on the Steinway. "You were right," he said in the clip, chuckling into the camera. I forgot how hard this one is. I laughed out loud when I watched it, the sound bouncing off the empty walls of my apartment like an echo I hadn't heard in years. I hadn't realized how lonely I'd become, or maybe how used to loneliness I'd grown. One evening, I walked past a music store in the city. Not like Shelton's, this one was cleaner, more modern, lined with glass display cases and staff in matching polos. A young guy, maybe 19, was playing a scale on an electric keyboard. He wasn't great, but he was trying. I stood just outside, hands in my jacket pockets, watching through the window as he hit a wrong note and winced. He looked around, embarrassed, not realizing no one inside had even noticed. I almost walked in, almost told him it was okay to mess up. That music didn't care how perfect you were, just that you kept listening. But I didn't. I just kept walking. Back home. I pulled out the stack of letters Dad had given me. I'd read a few more over the past week, but there was one near the bottom I'd avoided. The envelope was different, thicker paper, written in cursive, dated 4 years ago. Inside was just one page. Caleb. I dreamed about the house last night, the old one. You were 10 again, and you were trying to teach me a song you made up. I kept getting the rhythm wrong. You didn't get mad. You just played it louder until I caught up. I woke up with the melody still in my head. It didn't exist, but it felt real. I think what I miss most isn't the music, or even the house. It's the sound of you being patient with me. I didn't deserve it then, but I remember it now. Love. Dad, I held the letter in my hands for a long time, rereading that last sentence until it felt carved into my skin. That weekend, I called him. "Hey," he said, picking up on the second ring. "Thought I might hear from you. Got your letter?" I said, "The dream one." He was quiet for a beat. "Yeah, that one felt different when I wrote it. It was..." I hesitated, then added, "I've been thinking about writing a new piece." "You mean composing?" "Yeah," I said. "Just something simple. A duet. Maybe we could work on it together." He let out a slow breath. "I'd love that." So we started. Over video calls at first. Me sitting at my MIDI keyboard, Him perched at the Steinway, Roscoe occasionally barking in the background. We didn't rush it. We just layered small parts chords, motifs, fragments of old lullabies he used to hum under his breath while cooking eggs on Sundays. We called it Monroe Variations. Somewhere around week 3, Rachel reached out. It was a voice note, short and cold. Dad says you two are composing music together now. Just letting you know Mom isn't thrilled. She's been asking questions. Don't pull him into your version of things. I didn't reply, not because I didn't have words, but because I knew she wasn't really talking to me. She was talking to the version of me she kept in her head, the runaway, the selfish one, the ghost who only showed up when it made a scene. Let her keep him. I thought once, let her have the stories. I'll make something else. But I didn't think that anymore, because now I had something she couldn't erase: music. A sound that came from both our hands, stitched together with memory and grief and time. Dad and I finished the piece 2 months later. It was short, just under 4 minutes. But in that time, it moved through everything we couldn't say. The soft hesitations, the discord that resolved only after patience, the final note that didn't land on a perfect ending, just stopped, with enough space to imagine what came next. We didn't perform it, didn't record it. We just played it. Once, over a speakerphone call, each of us with one half of the arrangement, and when it ended, he was quiet. Then he said, "That's the best thing I've done in years. You helped write it." He chuckled. Still true. He invited me back the next month. I hesitated. Rachel's gonna be there. He admitted. She wants to talk. Said she's willing to try. Try hearing you. That's all I asked of her. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no. Instead, I hung up, went to my keyboard, and played the first few bars of Monroe Variations. It wasn't perfect. It never would be. But it was real, and it was ours. The flight back to Dad's town was uneventful, just a blur of clouds, the occasional child crying, and a flight attendant who smiled without really meaning it. I kept my headphones in the entire time, listening on loop to the digital mock-up of Monroe Variations. Each repetition revealed something new, a breath I hadn't noticed in the pause, a note slightly off-center that sounded more human than wrong. It wasn't polished, but it had presence. Like us. Dad met me at the airport with Roscoe in the back seat of his Subaru. The dog barked twice when I slid in, tail wagging so hard he thudded against the window. I reached back and scratched behind his ears. "Missed you too, bud." Dad chuckled. He's become my shadow. Better than a mirror, at least he doesn't talk back. We drove in companionable silence, the kind that sits easily between two people who no longer need to fill space with noise. The town hadn't changed much. Same faded billboards, same diner on 5th with the E flickering in breakfast. But there was a new mural near the library, 2 hands reaching toward a piano, barely touching. "Did you see that?" I asked, nodding toward it. Dad gave a sly smile. "They unveiled it last week. Local artist. Said it was inspired by reconnection." I told her I knew the feeling. We didn't talk about Rachel until later. Back at the house. The piano stood quietly in the corner like a guest who knew better than to speak out of turn. Dad made tea while I wandered into the room, my hand resting lightly on the instrument's lid. She said she'd come by around 5. Dad called from the kitchen. "What exactly did you say to her?" I said this wasn't about sides anymore. He returned with 2 mugs, setting one in front of me. Chamomile again. His default. And what did she say to that? She said she didn't believe me, he admitted, but she was willing to see for herself. I nodded and stared out the window. The clouds had started to gather. Around 5:15, I heard the tires crunching on gravel. Rachel stepped out in heels too high for the driveway. She was wearing a cream blazer, her hair pulled into a sleek knot. She looked like she was walking into a boardroom, not a childhood home. When she came in, she didn't smile. "Hey," she said, eyes flicking between me and Dad. "Hi," I replied, standing. She took off her shoes with sharp, efficient movements and walked into the living room like she still owned it. Roscoe trotted over, tail wagging. She ignored him. Dad gestured to the couch. "Let's sit." The three of us settled awkwardly, Dad in his armchair, me on the far end of the couch. Rachel perched like she might flee at any second. "I wasn't expecting to be here like this," she started, voice low. I nodded. "Same." She took a breath. "I want to say something without it turning into another war." "I'll listen," I said. She glanced at Dad, then back at me. "I was angry when you left. You got to run." "I stayed." "I didn't run," I said quietly. "I just didn't know how to stay." "I know that now," she said, surprising both of us. "But back then, Mom was a wreck, and she leaned on me in ways no teenager should have to carry. I resented you for not being there, and I resented you for making me feel like I didn't belong anymore." Silence. Dad shifted in his chair but said nothing. This wasn't his conversation to lead. Rachel looked down at her hands. Her nails were perfectly done. "When I didn't invite you to the party, I told myself it was to protect the peace. But really, I think I didn't want to share the spotlight. You didn't want to risk him seeing me." She didn't deny it. "Yeah." A storm had started outside. Light rain tapped against the windows like a polite warning. "I can't undo it," she said. "But I'm here, and that has to count for something." I looked at her, really looked. Beneath the polish and poise, there was exhaustion, the kind that doesn't show up on camera, the kind you earn from pretending too long. "It does," I said. "It does count." She exhaled, relief flickering across her face before retreating. Dad leaned forward, hands on his knees. "This is all I ever wanted. You don't have to like each other, but if you can be honest, we've got something." We sat like that for a while, not smiling, not hugging, just sitting, letting it settle. Eventually, Rachel stood. "I should go," she said. She walked toward the door, then paused. "Before I forget, Mom's asking about you." "Me?" I asked, surprised. She saw a photo of the piano. "Didn't know it was from you." I think it made her feel something." I raised an eyebrow. "What kind of something? I don't know," she admitted. "But it's a crack. You might be able to slip through." She opened the door, the wind catching her hair as she stepped outside. "Thanks for coming," I said. She turned, expression unreadable. "Thanks for not slamming the door in my face." And then she was gone. That night, Dad and I sat at the piano again. This time, we didn't play Monroe variations. We just improvised. Me on melody, him on chords, neither of us saying a word. The storm continued outside, thunder rolling softly in the distance. It felt like rain washing dust from old windows. After we finished, he leaned back. "You think you'll reach out to your mom?" "Eventually," I said. "Not yet." He nodded. "Whenever you're ready. Before bed." I checked my phone. No new messages from Rachel. No calls from Mom. But there was a comment on one of my recent audio clips, just a simple line from a stranger. This piece made me feel like I forgave someone I wasn't ready to. I stared at it for a long time. Sometimes, music does the speaking for you. Sometimes, that's enough. And sometimes, it opens a door no one remembers closing. The rain stopped around midnight. I stood on the back porch wrapped in one of Dad's old flannel jackets, listening to the drip, drip, drip of water sliding from the roof. The air smelled like pine and soil and something older, maybe forgiveness. If it had a scent? Inside, the house had gone still. Dad had gone to bed early, the letters tucked neatly back into the wooden box beside his armchair. Roscoe snored softly at the foot of the staircase. I should have gone to sleep too, but my mind wouldn't slow down. So I sat at the Steinway. The bench creaked as I settled in. I touched the keys gently, not pressing down, just letting my fingers rest where sound could begin. I wasn't there to play something grand, just something honest. And I started. Simple chords, half a scale, a few arpeggios that reminded me of the lullabies Dad hummed during storms when I was a kid. There was no structure, no plan, just feeling. Halfway through, I closed my eyes. I didn't notice the footsteps until they stopped in the doorway. I figured you'd still be awake, Rachel said. I opened my eyes, startled. What are you doing here? She walked in, arms crossed, hair pulled back with strands falling loose around her face. She looked more like my sister than she had earlier that afternoon. I didn't want to leave it like that, she said. I drove around for a while, then ended up back here. I scooted over, gesturing to the empty side of the bench. You still remember how to play? She gave a tired smile. Chopsticks. And maybe that one Taylor Swift song we obsessed over in middle school. Close enough. She sat beside me. For a moment, we both just looked at the keys. Neither of us moved. I kept thinking, she said quietly, that if I just controlled the narrative who came to what, who got credit for what I could keep things from falling apart. But they already had. I replied. She nodded. I guess I just didn't want anyone else to see it. We sat in the kind of silence you only earn after confession. Do you think Mom will actually call? I asked. Rachel hesitated. I don't know. She's stubborn. And scared. And angry in ways I still don't understand. She hated what you reminded her of, I said. Rachel blinked. What do I remind her of? Control. Fixing things. The weight of keeping appearances. She looked away, her jaw tightening. And you? I gave a small laugh. Freedom. The kind she never had. Her shoulders dropped. Yeah, that sounds about right. I played a few more soft notes, then stopped. Do you want to see something? She nodded. I stood and grabbed the stack of letters from the side table, then handed them to her. He wrote all these. Never sent them. She took them, turning the bundle in her hands like it might bite. Can I read one? Yeah. Pick any. She sat cross-legged on the couch and opened one near the middle. As she read, her face changed barely, but I saw it. Her mouth parted, her eyebrows furrowed, and when she finished, she held it against her chest the same way I had days before. I didn't know he missed you like this, she whispered. Neither did I, until he said it without saying it. She nodded slowly. You know, when I said Mom was asking about you, I wasn't lying. She's softer now, but only in private. I don't need her to be soft, I said. Just honest. Rachel folded the letter and returned it to the pile. Then maybe it's time for the last conversation. I stared at the ceiling for a moment. The fan spun gently, creaking once every few rotations. I'm scared, I admitted. Me too. She stood and walked to the door. You're still flying out tomorrow? Yeah. I'll drive you, she said. If you want. I smiled. I'd like that. She turned the knob but paused. For what it's worth. Caleb, I'm proud of what you did for Dad. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it. Thanks, I said, for saying it now. She left, the screen door shutting behind her with a soft clack. I sat back down at the piano and played again. This time, I didn't close my eyes. I wanted to see the notes happen. I wanted to feel the room respond, because this was a house that had finally started listening. The next morning, we packed quietly. Dad made breakfast: overcooked eggs, dry toast, and orange juice that tasted like it had been in the fridge since the Clinton administration. But it was perfect. He hummed as he cooked. Roscoe stared at the toaster like it might produce steak. Rachel showed up in jeans and sneakers, hair down, no blazer, no armor. We loaded my bag into the trunk, and I hugged Dad goodbye by the steps. "You'll call when you land?" he asked. "Of course." "And Caleb?" He hesitated, then added, "Next time. Don't wait so long to come back." "I won't," I said. "You have a duet to practice. Remember?" He grinned. "You're not off the hook either." Rachel and I drove in silence for the first few minutes, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Do you ever wonder," she said eventually, "how things might have turned out if we hadn't let so much space grow between us all the time?" I replied. She nodded. "But maybe. That space is why this means something now." I looked out the window. The mural flashed by again, 2 hands reaching for a piano. "Maybe," I said softly. She dropped me off at departures. We didn't hug, but she looked me in the eye before I closed the door. "You're a good brother, Caleb." I smiled. "You're not so bad yourself." As I walked toward security, I felt lighter. Not fixed. Not finished. Just more myself than I'd been in a long time. When I boarded the plane, I reached for my headphones. But this time, I didn't put them on. I just listened. To the hum of the engine, to the breath of strangers, to the quiet, waiting world. Back home, the apartment felt different. Not bigger, not smaller, just quieter in a way that didn't hurt. I left my suitcase by the door, let the light filter through the blinds, and dropped my keys into the dish with the chipped ceramic rim. I stood there for a long moment, just letting the stillness settle. The old me would have put on headphones, escaped into sound. But not today. Today, I wanted to feel the silence. I went to the kitchen, made tea, and pulled the stool closer to the window. My plant was still alive barely. The mail was a stack of mostly junk. But there, wedged between a cable bill and a pre-approved credit card, was an envelope I didn't recognize. Handwritten. No return address. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded note. Short, careful cursive. "Caleb, your father told me what you did. I didn't know you remembered that piano. Or that he did. I assumed you'd both buried that kind of memory a long time ago. Maybe I assumed too much about a lot of things. I won't pretend everything is fine, or that I was fair. But I see now that I chose the wrong kind of silence. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. Mom." I read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't an apology, not fully, but it was the closest she'd come in years to cracking the veneer, and that mattered. I set it on the table, beside my mug, and let it sit in the sun. That night, I opened my editing software. The cursor blinked on a blank track. I added a title: Monroe Variations Final Cut, not for publishing, not for credit, just for us. I laid down the bass melody, Dad's chords from our recording, then layered in my upper harmonies, careful to leave space. I added faint room noise, our conversation, laughter, the creak of the bench. At the end, I stitched in a single breath, his. Just before the last note. It wasn't perfect. The levels were off. One of my high notes clipped slightly, but I didn't correct it. Some flaws are worth preserving. It took me 3 hours. When it was done, I exported it and sent the file to Dad with no subject line, just a message: us. A few minutes later, he replied with a single word: listening. I imagined him in that living room, Roscoe curled up nearby, the Steinway watching like an old friend. And I smiled. The next day, I received an email. It was from a local arts organization I'd submitted a sample portfolio to almost a year ago and then forgotten about. They were looking for composers to score a short documentary about family estrangement and reconciliation. They wanted to feature original, emotionally driven compositions that felt like memory. I stared at the screen, then read it again. We came across your track, Monroe Variations. If it's available, we'd love to talk. I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to, but because it felt like something delicate, a moment that needed to breathe before I said yes. Instead, I called Dad. Guess what I said when he picked up? What, you finally beat me at Scrabble close. I laughed. Someone wants to use our piece. In a film. He paused. Our piece? Yeah. I sent them the final version. They think it sounds like memory. I heard him exhale. That's what we were trying to write. Exactly. I'm proud of you, he said. But more than that, I'm glad we got to share it. Even if no one ever heard it, I'd still feel the same. I know, I said. But it's nice to be heard. A few days passed. I agreed to the project. They sent over a contract. I didn't ask for much money. I just wanted the credits to read, composed by Caleb Monroe. With original inspiration by Thomas Monroe. I sent a screenshot to Dad. He didn't reply with words, just a photo of him sitting at the piano, holding the frame with my old drawing, and smiling like a man who remembered how to be proud. Later that week, Rachel sent me a message. No warning. Mom's listening to the piece on loop. She won't say anything, but I see it in her face. Something's shifting. I didn't reply. I didn't have to. Some things take their time. One morning, I went back to the music store, the clean, modern one where I'd seen the nervous kid weeks ago. I walked in this time. Just wandered between rows of digital pianos and keyboards until I saw him again. Still there. Still trying. Still flinching when he got it wrong. I walked over and stood beside him. You mind if I try something? I asked. He looked up, startled, but nodded. I sat, played the first 4 bars of Monroe Variations, then looked at him. Want to try the top line? He hesitated, but I guided his fingers gently to the first note. We played. Sloppy, uneven, beautiful. And when we finished, he looked at me wide-eyed. What's that called? It doesn't have to be anything yet, I said. Just keep playing it. And I walked out. Back at home. The apartment was still quiet, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. I set up the letters from Dad on a shelf. Not to display, but just to know they were there. I framed the sketch of the Steinway again and hung it near my desk. Every morning, it caught the light just right. Rachel and I spoke occasionally. Not often, but when we did, it was honest. One night, I received another letter. No handwriting this time, just an email. I listened to it again today. Mom wrote, "This time, I heard you. No signature, no emojis, just that." I saved it, didn't print it, didn't respond. Just let it be. Sometimes, healing isn't about reunion or forgiveness or starting over. Sometimes, it's just about being known, even if only in fragments, even if only in a song.